Thank you very much, Ruth. As Ruth said, I'm going to talk for about half an hour, and then if you have any questions or comments, then please go ahead. So it's class and heroism in Joshua Reynolds's military portraits. We're going to look at a selection. And first of all, I just wanted to, those of you who may not know, that Britain was involved in a series of wars throughout most of the 18th century, and this led to strong public interest in military figures. Much was written about these military figures in the press, their successes and failures, and this interest is seen in visual culture, especially in portraits by leading artists such as Reynolds. These figures were officers who entered the army through a system based on privilege. Thus, there was a strong association between the elite and military service, which in turn afforded a strong association with the ruling class as an opportunity to reinforce its status in society. So as Bonehill says, you could argue that it's the elite's collective imagination of itself. And you could also say that the resultant portraiture of military figures can be seen in the context of a statement of patrician power. So we look first at a much earlier image. So going to an earlier portrait, this is Sir Godfrey Kneller's image of the Duke of Marlborough, much earlier in the 18th century than the ones we're going to look at. And we can see his rendering of the masculine ideal of the aristocratic military commander. It portrays dignity and the status of the sitter. We can see he seems to be in a suit of armor. He's got heavenly bodies around him and various people also. Not, I would say, a very realistic image of being on the battlefield, but nevertheless, it portrays him as this aristocratic military commander. But Reynolds wanted to differentiate himself from this type of portraiture. So by the middle of the century, Reynolds sought to differentiate himself from such earlier male portraiture, as well as from fellow artists in the highly competitive business of portraiture, while retaining the all-important dignity and status of the sitter. Pictorial conventions such as the officer in uniform jacket, often elegantly edged with gold or silver braid, clutching a sword, and confident pose were all retained. But in addition, Reynolds looked to inject visual drama, narrative, sometimes animation, illusion, and even a psychological element into his military portraiture. So we're going to look at 3 case studies to see contested representations of the elite hero. These will be from 2 very differently received wars. So the first one is Sir Joshua Reynolds's John Manners, Marquis of Granby, from 1766. It's now in the State Museum of Florida. There is another version very similar to this in the Royal Collection, but what I'm talking about is this one, and you'll realize as I go through, I am talking about this specific painting and its provenance. The second image we're going to look at is a very moving image of a young officer, Cornet Nehemiah Winter, from an earlier period in the 7 Years' War. The painting references a skirmish on the French coast, resulting in significant loss of life on the part of the British. And the final case study we're going to look at is Reynolds's Colonel Banastra Tarleton of 1782, and that's during the American War of Independence, as we call it now, and it depicts a self-styled, somewhat questionable military figure who cultivated a notorious reputation on his return to Britain after the country's defeat. So first of all, Granby. It's a full-length equestrian portrait of the Marquis of Granby, and it's an impressive expression of military power. The size alone makes it impressive. It's the largest of the ones we're going to look at. And it was an important commission for Reynolds, enhancing his reputation as the painter of elite male subjects. Granby was the eldest son of the third Duke of Rutland, and during the 7 Years' War, much was written about his military successes. High status as a member of the aristocracy and as a military commander-in-chief were therefore further enhanced by his well-documented role in the war. Granby was a very popular figure, not only due to his elite status in society and the army, but he was also known for his benevolence, particularly in his charity towards soldiers less fortunate than himself. Here we can see Edward Penny's image, which has a narrative to it of Granby coming across a sick soldier and his family while he's out with fellow officers, seen to the left of the image. And he reaches into his jacket, I don't know whether you can see that, to give money to the soldier and his family. When Reynold's portrait of Granby was shown at the Society of Artists exhibition in 1766, viewers would have remembered Penny's Granby, exhibited the year before, and this interplay between paintings that were exhibited added to the interest of exhibition goers. Going back to Reynold's image, it's one of a traditional battlefield commander, and it was painted a few years after the successful conclusion of the 7 Years' War. It pictures the sitter during the Battle of Vellinghausen, which proved to be a major victory for the British and their allies in 1761. The three main figures, including the horse here, are close to the picture plane, and it creates a powerful impact. The dismounted commander-in-chief, his page affording him a status with an attendant, and the enormous horse. The monumentality is striking, aided by the size of the painting. The painting is about 8 foot by 6'10". We can see Reynolds has reused elements of traditional iconography of powerful leaders. The solid, almost Herculean physique of Granby, the black page, illustrating his ability to paint different shades of skin, and the fact that the horse is in this, again, enhancing the elite commander. But Reynolds has also injected visual drama and narrative into the composition. Granby's famous bald head is highlighted as the light falls on his head, set against the horse's dark black mane flowing in the wind. Patterns of light throughout the painting draw attention to Granby's shining breastplate and his jacket with intricate rendering of its elaborate braid. You can see here. And it matches that depicted on the horse. If you look at this, and in his bridle as well. In the distance, sunlight pierces through the clouds, and it picks out the action of the battle with billowing smoke in the distance. In the shadow of the middle ground, we see cavalrymen awaiting orders to charge into the melee. The battle isn't over yet. This clear narrative is part of the drama. So too is the positioning of the three central figures as each scans the territory with their eyes, even the horse, all looking in different directions, apparently attuned to the unfolding events surrounding them. Granby's elite authority and command of the battlefield is there, but also the painting was commissioned as a gift for the French commander he defeated, Marshal Broglio, an honoured opponent. I don't know what Broglio thought of this gift and whether he put it in his chateau, but is it a magnanimous gesture? Granby is dismounted. He has an ungloved hand. Is he ready to shake the hand of his defeated enemy? We just don't know, but that is the provenance of that painting. The next image we're going to look at is a surprisingly different one of a military officer, and it was commissioned a few years earlier in 1759 during a less successful period of the 7 Years' War. Jeremiah Winter joined the 11th Dragoons in the previous year as a cornet. That's the junior sort of entry level for a commissioned officer. A few months later, he was involved in a disastrous raid on the French coast. British forces landed in Saint-Malo, unaware of a large force of French troops ready to confront them. The British commanding officer ordered his force to retreat to Saint-Cas, but the French attacked using cannon and heavy fire. It caused considerable loss of life, and Winter's detachment of the 11th Dragoons lost half of its horses and a third of its men. And Winter at this time would have been about 18 years old. We assume Winter was caught up in these harrowing events, and we do know that he stipulated to Reynolds that the events of Saint-Cas should be referenced in his portrait. A portrait hanging in Reynolds' showroom at this time was one done speculatively to show Reynolds' talent as a portraitist of military figures. And it's Captain Robert Orme, which you can see at the National Gallery. It's dated around 1756, and it appears to have been the starting point for Winter's portrait. Orme too had witnessed a military disaster in America just before the outbreak of the 7 Years' War, and Reynolds captures this rather vaguely in the distance. The overall tone of the painting is subdued and somber. The dimensions differ from the one of Winter, but the position of Orme with his hand across his horse and the position of the horse with his head bowed, although it's central to this painting because of its dimensions, it is remarkably similar to the painting of Winter, and the horse is remarkably similar. Orme's portrait has a psychological quality which may well have appealed to Winter and the artist when they were reflecting on how to depict the young officer who had experienced a traumatic military encounter. The painting of Winter has an unusual height-to-width ratio for a portrait, but this affords Reynolds the space to depict in some detail the events of the battle at Saint-Cas. The painting's divided into two by a dark tree with overhanging branches. Winter stands full length to the right of the canvas with his horse beside him near the tree. If I just go back to the last image we looked at, you can see again the similarity in the pose. His right arm is across the horse, holding onto its mane or the reins. Winter's left arm is touching his sword, but not near the hilt, nor is there an implication he's ready to draw it. The young cornet, dressed in accurately depicted uniform, looks out at the viewer. To the left, only a short way away into the distance, we witness the battle. This description implies that the painting conforms to the tradition of equestrian portraiture seen in images of kings and famous generals. But although Winter might be wearing an elegant silver-braided uniform, there's a lack of grandiloquence in his figure's demeanour, which might partly be explained by his youthful looks and the lack of the prestige of an attendant page, as in the Granby painting. And in addition, the horse's lower head evokes dejection, even mourning. Interestingly, Reynolds uses the same horse's pose in a later portrait, which I'll just show you next, but to very entirely different effect. And that's partly achieved by the play of light on the horse. It's not quite so dark and mournful looking. The use of a less somber palette, and significantly, Coussemaker's nonchalant appearance. Looks very relaxed and leaning back on the tree almost. But going back to Winter, I question that this is the depiction of a confident elite hero as the figure gazes out at the viewer. The expression in his eyes could be understood as fearful and traumatized. Reynolds uses strong characurisio to dramatic effect here, the almost impenetrable darkness near the bottom and to the right of the canvas invoke a sense of impending doom. The frontal light on the upper part of Winter highlights details of the uniform and is particularly striking as it falls upon the youthful face, which is white. We have to caution here because a lot of Reynolds paint is quite unstable, and it could be that this has, as in the Waldegrave sisters or Waldegrave ladies, this has lightened over the years. But to us looking at it now, he does look rather traumatized, almost shell-shocked. Then from out of the shadow to the left, light focuses on the battle, where bodies of men and horses can be seen, and an officer on a white charger is rearing, the white charger is rearing, making a stand against overwhelming French foot soldiers. The strong contrasts of light and shadow can contribute to a visual drama, but also to a psychological content. Maybe Winter's figure doesn't project elite authority of command, and perhaps Reynolds is engaging here with the complex issue of expressing elite military masculinity, but in this case mixed with anxiety and failure in and around the battlefield. Yet another contrasting image and challenging image is from a later and more problematic war. The American War of Independence was unpopular with many in Britain. It was considered as contentious, and it polarized public opinion. Tarleton too, Banastra Tarleton, also polarized public opinion. He was the son of Liverpool merchants involved in the transatlantic slave trade, and he joined the 1st Dragoon Guards as a cornet when his family purchased a commission for him after he squandered his inheritance on gambling and womanizing. He got through his father's inheritance in a year. And once he was involved in the war in America, he was quickly promoted. Unlike Winter, the last one we were just looking at, he stayed with the army for about 10 years and left as a lieutenant, so he didn't progress very far. But Tarleton took to this very well, was quickly promoted, and he was known for his daring raids and ruthlessness. The Americans referred to him as Bloody Ban and Bloody Tarleton. And upon his return to London after the British were defeated, he was perceived by some as a military celebrity and hero. He took up with the gambling and drinking set of the Prince of Wales, which drew further attention to himself, and his behaviour was boastful about his American exploits. He also took up with the ex-mistress of the Prince of Wales, Mary Robinson, or Perdita Robinson, which also attracted further attention from the public. Tarleton seems to have revelled in his notoriety and the attention he drew from the press. Almost immediately upon his return, he sat to both Reynolds and Thomas Gainsborough, and both portraits were exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1782 at their exhibition in Somerset House. We can only speculate on Tarleton's motivation for wanting 2 full-length equestrian portraits of himself exhibited in the same year, but they certainly would have received attention from the exhibition goers, who would have enjoyed looking at such military celebrities. Sadly, Gainsborough's painting is lost to us, so we only know about it through leaflets relating to the exhibition. We don't know anything else. In this portrait, we see Tarleton centre and near the picture plane. His left leg is propped up on a cannon, and he's adjusting his sword. Gun smoke swirls around at the back, which denies a deep recessional view. The upper half of his figure is silhouetted against the smoke, with frontal light falling onto the left side of his face as it's turned to one side. The frontal light also picks up the pale materials and braid in his jacket. Tarleton wears the green uniform of the British Legion. He has light, tight-fitting breeches and high boots of a cavalryman. His hat, which is quite something, has black swan feathers. It's tipped slightly over one eye, and it was reputedly his own design. It's seen more as a bit of a fashion statement in some respects. The calmness of Tarleton's figure is juxtaposed with the two panicking horses held forcibly down by a trooper. You can just see the trooper there holding the horses. The message of success on the battlefield is expressed by the captured cannon. This one here is putting his foot on, and then we've got one there. And there's a standard lying on at his feet, one of the enemy standards. We wonder whether the artist is having a bit of a fun, bit of a joke, perhaps shared with the sitter, showing a phallic symbol of the cannon's barrel pointed at Tarleton's backside. Tarleton's pictured in the midst of a battle. The energy and turbulence of the battle surround Tarleton, who appears calm and in control as he's about to change horse. Reynolds is expressing a clear narrative. The visual drama is heightened by the pictorial interplay of light and shade. Some regard it as war fantasized, an attempt to bolster the confident image of the elite hero at a time of British military defeat. Reynolds also uses the quotation of an antique sculpture in the way he twists Tarleton's pose, in a similar way to the classical statue of the Roman patriot Cincinnatus, a cast which belonged to the Royal Academy. By alluding to this Roman patriot, a knowledgeable viewer might make the association with the classical ideal that perhaps reflected and ennobled the sitter. Is Reynolds' portrait seen as a projection of the sitter's ambition? The painting might have drawn notice at the exhibition and engaged with the sitter's celebrity status, but there was also criticism of Tarleton's behaviour and self-promotion. For example, satirical images ridiculed him. Here we see an expression is the frontispiece of a parody of a book of parody of military life. And it shows Britain's military leaders, these can be identified, these figures, contemplating themselves in a mirror held by a satyr. On the wall behind them are charts. One references the colonial defeats, including another chart including the upside down map of America, of North America. At the back of this group, looking rather arrogant, is the diminutive figure of Tarleton grinning and holding his riding cane. Reynolds' image of Tarleton is done in such a way that you don't realise the shortness of his figure. So again, that is something that Reynolds has deliberately done. So just to conclude, very diverse images of the military officer, probably illustrating the artist's awareness of and interest in the popular visual culture surrounding elite military figures. The Granby portrait is an uncontested image of the elite officer, the epitome of heroic military leader, a commander-in-chief and an aristocrat, and his standing with the public was enhanced by his reputation of benevolence towards those in need. Cornet Neremiah Winter. Here the artist is engaging with the trauma and anxiety expressed by a young man sent to war and let down by his superiors. We might perceive the psychological distress of this young officer caught up in events beyond his control. And finally, Colonel Banastra Tarleton, a contested image, an officer known for his notoriety during the war, as well as when he's back at home. A fantasized image of an experience in the midst of a battle, and a problematic image of the elite hero. So if you have any questions or any comments, please go ahead and ask.
I noticed that the first big picture is in Sarasota in Florida. Do you know how it got there? Was it simply bought uh, by the Americans as part of their investing in artwork, or was it did it find its way there for some other reason?
Okay. I know it's part of a collection um, of a wealthy family. I don't know how it got there. Obviously, Broglio didn't keep it indefinitely.
Yes. Alison, you said earlier that that there was another picture of the Marquis of Granby, and did you say
Yeah.
it was in the Queen's collection, in the Royal
Yes,
collection?
it's in the Royal Collection. I don't know what size it is, and I don't know its provenance. That's why I just said the one I'm talking about. This one was a gift to his defeated the defeated commander, Marshal Broglio.
Yes.
And have you seen the one in the Royal collection? I don't suppose there's an opportunity to see it that much.
I haven't seen it. In fact, I didn't know it was there until recently. I don't know what size it is. There is a painting in Petworth House of Granby, but it isn't this painting. But you immediately know it's him because of this bald head and his features. Um, but I don't know anything about the one in the Royal Collection. I just know that there is one there, and I don't know whether it's on display and where it might be on display.
It's just so magnificent. You know, that horse's rump is just so
Yes.
beautifully done, isn't it? I know he's, not known for horses like Stubbs, for
Mhm.
instance, but
Mhm.
it's just a most magnificent picture of a horse, isn't it?
It's lovely, and I think he's got real character the way he's looking in one direction and the others are looking in different directions. It's as if the three of them are working together.
Alison, the iconography of the three are very different.
Mm. We'll put the
Um,
three together.
I'm really. Can you just summarize the difference between the victory, defeat, or potential defeat, and the last one, the tartan one? What is that making fun of this kind of soldier?
Well, yeah, so just to answer the first part of your question, this is a part, the Granby painting depicts a very successful element, part of the 7 Years' War. It's later than the Winter painting. So, yes, it's very much glorifying success. Um, and the Winter is there was a lot of in the press about this raid that ended in the terrible loss of life at St. Cass. Um, and the I think it was the Lieutenant General was Bligh, and or Lieutenant Commander was Bligh, and he ordered this retreat, and I don't know whether it was very fair, but he got an awful lot of criticism in the press for the disaster there. And then I don't know that Reynolds would be making fun because after all, he wants to be paid for his portrait. He wants more commissions. But I think because of what we know, this is more, I suppose my expression of this painting is more to do with I know about Tarleton, you know about Tarleton, and how we view it now. At the time, he was a controversial figure. Some people would be laughing at him with his daft hat and his swan feathers. Um, some would know his family's history. He became, I mean, he goes on for quite a while. He took up with Mary Robinson and attracted a lot of attention. He became a member of Parliament. He went against anyone wishing to abolish the slave trade. It was in his family's interest to maintain the slave trade. So he's quite a controversial character, and certainly in the 21st century, he's not somebody that we would admire. He later in life dumps, I suppose, is a polite way, or not so polite way of saying Mary Robinson, who's an interesting character in herself and does some writing later on in her life. And he marries a young heiress. So he's just a certain type, I suppose. He at the time was, you know, some people saw him as a celebrity and others saw him as a show off.
Yes, I was forgetting that, of course, the artist is being paid for the result of
Yes.
each of these,
Mm.
often and more often than not by the subject of the painting.
Yes, usually the sitter or the sitter's family. Yeah, yeah. I think with Nehemiah Winter, I think it was his mother who commissioned that.
Goodness. Thank you.
I think that explains the fact it was his mother commissioning it, because in a way you know, you can see it in the boy's face, that sort of panic, a bit like rabbit in the headlights.
Mm.
Not quite sure what's happening, and you can't imagine that he himself would have commissioned it perhaps like that.
Well, he did. I'll just get the one with the full picture. He did stipulate, why I don't know, but he did want this raid, this skirmish referenced in the painting. It was obviously something that was very important to him, an experience that might have been awful, but he wanted it referenced.
Yes.
And I think the trauma that we might see in his face, it is aided by the fact the face is so white now. And as I was saying, we have to be a little bit careful. It might not have been quite so white at the time it was painted. I mean, Reynolds sometimes had to go back and touch up his portraits and paintings because they, even in his own lifetime, they'd suffered, you know, poor stability.
For the tartan picture, did the raid that took place, did they go by sea to St. Malo?
Oh, sorry, in the winter. Yeah, well, I imagine they landed because there were vessels involved. So I imagine they landed on the coast and were met by French troops ready for them, ready and waiting. Yeah.
Right.
Just to say thank you very much, Alison. And it's very interesting the way you've chosen 3 different portraits to put together so we can compare them. My only comment is that, as with most portraits, I'm sure that the sitters think they look fabulous. Art is always through the eye of the viewer, isn't it? So probably they were very pleased with them all. But lovely talk, thank you, and lots for us to think about afterwards.
It's a pleasure.
I just wanted to say, I think you're a supremely good art lecturer in that you talk so clearly. You know, your pacing is perfect and your articulation, you're very, very clear in what you say. And you illustrate it with great thought. You know, what you've chosen it's also apposite, but also your specialist knowledge, you know, talking about height to width ratios, which is something that most of us might not think of, or positioning, or unstable paints, and the historical perspective, the work that you did in terms of giving it all context. So many, many thanks. I thought that was a really super talk, and I hope you'll talk to us again one day. But on behalf of us all, thank you. So, you know, from all of us, thank you. And before we go, I just want to mention that the next Friends event is on the 28th of November, 6:30 to 8. There'll be a discount shopping evening with a hefty discount for any Christmas cards or goods that people want to buy in the shop, with mulled cider and minced pies and a view of the really excellent Sydney Cyme exhibition that's currently on. So I urge everyone to go if you haven't had a chance yet. But so that's on the 28th, Thursday, 28th of November.